Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, focusing on real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined as always by Derek Brissett, but this time we have another special guest. We have a special interview to close out the season. It is currently, to my knowledge, the only person at the Toronto Arrows who's been able to lift the MLR shield, and the current head coach for the Arrows, Peter Smith. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Stu. Thanks for having me, Derek.
All right. So with all our interviews, we start off with a few questions about how you got into the game. So what got you started in rugby in the first place?
Well, I actually picked up the game pretty late by Australian standards. So I didn't start playing until I was 13. I was a soccer player up till then, and even though I played soccer, I played a lot of touch footy with my mates, and they'd been trying to convince me for years to play rugby. And it wasn't until I got to high school and I watched the first 15 game, and the whole school, parents, family, everyone you knew was there, and the atmosphere was crazy. And I was just like, yep, I'm going to do everything I can to play for that team when I'm older. So I made the switch the following year and haven't looked back since.
That's actually really kind of cool, because it's like I feel like that's the way like most Canadians get introduced to rugby, is through learning about it for the first time in high school. So that's actually, although it sounds like it's much bigger in Australia than it is here, but that's actually kind of cool that you got a little bit of a somewhat similar story to, I'm sure, a lot of the Canadian players on the Arrows too.
No, exactly. Yeah, I was through and through soccer player, and didn't think much of it, and picked it up late, but here we are.
So when you're first getting started in rugby, then is there anybody, like, whether it's a coach or a friend or teammates that you credit as like really being like the driving force and the influence starting the rugby career?
Honestly, there were so many, family, friends, school teachers. It's hard to single out anyone because everyone was just so supportive. I mean, I know my dad wasn't the biggest fan of soccer, so I know he loved when I finally made the switch to rugby, because my two brothers were already playing rugby at the time. But I couldn't single out anyone. I wasn't the most confident player, but my coaches, my teammates, my friends, they just instilled so much confidence in me and helped me along the way, particularly when I was first starting out. Like I couldn't tackle when I first started. I had no idea from a technique point of view how to tackle. And so my buddies, we basically just went to a friend's house when I was younger and just played tackle rugby in the front yard for as long as it took for me to pick up. So just a combination of family, friends, school teachers. Everyone was just so supportive, and I think that's why I love rugby so much, and I stuck with it.
All right. Well, that was great to have such a supportive network behind you. So when you were growing up, or even now, who is someone that every time they stepped onto the pitch that you just love to watch them play? With the exception of the Arrows, of course.
Yeah. Well, growing up, it was Stephen Larkham for sure. I mean, like, he was the kind of player you paid money to go see, and he made it look so easy. And I still enjoy watching old replays of him for the Wallabies. And actually, one time we were looking at recruiting a player, and one of his references was in fact Stephen Larkham. So I was able to actually touch base with him and just ask him a few questions about the player. And Stephen ended up, he was at Munster at the time, I think it was, and he ended up just having a 45 minute chat with me. He just was a great guy. And yeah, no, he was the guy. Like he was the guy all Aussies loved. And that was back in our golden era where he ran the show.
Did you end up signing the player?
We put an offer to him. I think this was a couple of years ago. This was maybe going into the 2020 season. We put an offer out to him, and he ended up getting a contract over in Japan. So he turned us down, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You still got to talk to Larkin, though, so it's a win, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I told my buddies about it after, and like they were just in because they like me, they just absolutely loved him. So they were just they were very jealous that I got to spend 30 minutes on the phone with him.
Well, swings and roundabouts to take it. But anyway, not talking about all these players going off to Japan. Let's talk about your career to begin with. So you played for Northern Suburbs Rugby Club in your youth. Now, for those of us, which may also include the hosts of this podcast, who are not fully experienced with the Shoot Shield, how did this competition unfold?
I actually grew up. So when I was younger, I played for my school, and didn't play too much club rugby outside of it because I went to a union school. So I actually, funnily enough, grew up supporting rugby league as a lot of young Australians do. So I had no idea who Northern Suburbs were up until the age of about 18 years old. And I don't actually know how that competition unfolded, but it is a huge competition in Sydney. And when I finished school, I had no idea how to pursue a career in union, and I was actually ready to make the switch to rugby league. But I had a few union clubs contact me as I was graduating and ended up signing for Gordon. So I spent a couple of years playing for Gordon, and I think going into my third season there, I saw the writing on the wall a bit. Gordon had at the time their number 10, Dave Harvey, who was the best club player in the comp and went on to play Super Rugby. They'd signed Josh Keel, who just returned from the Newcastle Falcons, and also signed Mike Herkus, the USA fly half who had just finished up in Japan. So I made my switch to Norths, and made my Shoot Shield debut as a 20-year-old, and that really launched my career from there. But I think the Shoot Shield comp, it's one of, if not the best club competitions in the world. We recruit a lot from there, as do I know a lot of Major League Rugby teams do. And there's just so many players who are running around there who would love an opportunity up here. And I know in North America with Major League Rugby that there's, the salaries are low and there's a lot of frustration that they're still sort of entry level salaries. But down there's so many guys earning $200 a win and nothing if they lose, who would do anything to get a full-time offer from up here. So it's a really, really good competition. I know back in the days before Super Rugby, to those games you get thousands and thousands of people packed into the local suburban grounds, and then Super Rugby came along and it kind of died out that competition a little bit, but now there's a huge resurgence back at home. I watch a lot of Shoot Shield, and I've been to a fair few games to have a look at some players and recruit some players, and the crowds are outstanding. I mean, when I played in it, what would it be now, a bit over a decade ago, there might be kind of 100 people at a game, but now most games there's a few thousand, particularly to the local derby games, which is huge. So, I mean, you look at Super Rugby in Australia and you see the crowds kind of dwindling, but the club game is as strong as ever back home.
We're going to be talking about your pro contracts in a moment, but something that was mentioned about the first pro contract you got is that your father is Welsh, and being born in Australia, having a Welsh father. Obviously, the Rugby World Cup came to Australia in 2003. Growing up, how much did you have to hate England?
Still do. We still do. Like, Dad was born in Wales but grew up in England, so he grew up in Exeter. Yeah, I think we supported any team that was going against England.
Yes,
and that applies to all sports, not just rugby. Cricket was a big one. I've tried to, through Dad, I've tried to get behind and support Wales, but I just can't not support Australia. But Wales are definitely the number 2 team in the household. I mean, the last Rugby World Cup, we were all gathered around the TV in red jerseys watching some of the games. But whenever there's a conflict between Australia and Wales, Australia always win.
Okay, all right. I can understand that. I can respect that. So, mentioning Wales, the first professional contract you were approached with was a short-term deal with the Welsh regional club, the Ospreys, in 2011. So how was it to travel halfway around the world for your first professional rugby contract?
Yeah, it was a different experience, to be honest. I think to be in that environment and to train with that caliber of player was amazing. It was a huge learning curve for me, and I probably didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, if I'm being honest. Like I had really high expectations for myself as a player. I was a huge warrior. I'd always worry about if I had a bad game or a bad session, and so when you train every day and all of that, it's I think looking back, I should have just been a 21-year-old and enjoy the moment and enjoy the experience. But I'm really grateful to have that experience in such a quality club in such a great part of the world. And I think at the time I probably struggled a little bit to be so far from the comforts of home, but yeah, it was a great learning experience for me, purely from a rugby point of view, and did make me a better player, and allowed me to experience, really what it took to be at that sort of level.
Yeah, and then after that, you kind of headed to Japan for a handful of years, and I guess Japan's obviously been a country that has kind of risen a lot on the world stage. And so what was it like playing in the Japan top league? And how have you kind of seen that sort of grow in the past few years as well? And I mean, obviously I know there's been even a couple arrows, Sam Malcolm kind of went, a couple guys went over to Japan for a few years and for a year or two and then came back as well. It's how does the experience in Japan, and how does it maybe kind of helped you grow as a player? And do you see that similar growth in other players that that have also headed over to Japan too?
Yeah, I think when you touch on the growth of rugby in Japan, and you look at their results of recent years, I think anyone who's been over there and experienced Japanese rugby, it comes as no surprise to them. I think my time there gave me a huge understanding of how to work hard. It's no surprise how they've climbed the world rankings. They would train for hours and then stay on the field and do extra for hours, and that's their mindset for years. From the high school level, they would go to school all day and then train for till the night time and then go home, and they do it all over again every single day. And then when they get to the university level, it's the same thing. They'd be doing 2-3 hour sessions, 4 hour sessions, and then do their extras and then go home. And so when they get to the professional level, they're just, the mindset of the players is so strong. I've never once heard a Japanese player complain about a teammate, a coach, a training session, and so on. They're just so disciplined at their craft. I remember being there, and we train 2.5 hours, 3 hours. And our training sessions were, we'd have a weight session where it's a leg day, and you would go, you pair up with a partner, you'd lift you do your squats, and your rest is when they go. So you go, they go, you go, they go. And that's nonstop for an hour, and you're just gone by the end of it. Then you do a 5K run directly after, and then you're out on the field training for 2 hours and doing contact. And then you'd get off the field because you're just done for the day, and you'd shower up and you'd walk out of there and you walk to your car and you look back on the field, and there's still 10-15 players doing the extras out on the field. You look at some scrummaging sessions, they go 100 plus scrums in a day. We would fly, or another team would fly over, and we just do a training session against them, and they would scrum for an hour and a half against each other. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but you do that for years, and that's the mindset for years. So it's no surprise how they've risen, and the amount of work that they've done. Probably not the most gifted team when it comes to physicality or anything like that when you look at the profile of rugby, of a Japanese rugby player, but their skill level is outstanding. The pace of the game over there is so quick, and everything I think that they've earned everything that they've got as a national team, and that's not just from the top 30, 40 players in the country. I mean, the top league, or League One as they call it, and the divisions below, is just you just got that mindset of athlete who's coming through, who just does everything they possibly can to be the best rugby player that they can be. And I know they've risen a whole lot in the world rankings recently, and I would suspect that they continue to do so over the coming years. And you draw similarities with the MLR. I think their professional competition started in, was it 2003 or the early 2000s? And it's taken probably, I think, 15 plus years to see the results with the national team. And the hope is that something similar happens with the MLR by providing the top players in the country exposure to a higher level game, and hopefully that we'll see the results come in several years' time with that. I know short term USA and Canada haven't qualified, but the hope is certainly long term that our national teams are a whole lot stronger in the future.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're all hoping for. I mean, I think we had an episode a few weeks back talking about just how long some of the other leagues kind of have taken to really feel the impact on the national teams level, not just in rugby, but other sports as well. But I guess, like, going back to the, like, kind of like the training that they did in Japan, is like, how is that difficult to get used to if you're a player coming from, say, a different part of the world?
Yeah, so I actually speak about this with the foreigners back when I was playing there, and I at the time when I signed for, it was Coca-Cola. I just, they offered me a contract, and I was pretty happy with it, so I took it. There's been these days that there are more foreign coaches and more of a foreign influence in that competition. So these days, if you've got a foreign coach, your sessions are pretty much limited to an hour. It's not the heavy 2-3 hour sessions that we might have been used to a few years ago. But I do know, talking to some foreigners there, that obviously try to, when they're picking their team that they're going to play, or when they've got a few offers, they kind of work out who's the coach and what the training structures are kind of like. But I've heard before me, like, sessions they were used to being long sessions, long days, but now with the amount of foreign coaches over there, that's certainly scaled back a fair bit. But I do know at university level and high school level, it's still a crazy amount of training. And look, they wouldn't have it any other way. To be honest, the Japanese players absolutely love that. They love being out on the field, and they love doing everything they can to play rugby and play at the best level that they can.
Yeah. While you were with Coca-Cola, because you did 2 seasons with them, is that correct?
I did one season with Coke.
Okay. Was that the season that ended with Coca-Cola being promoted, or their first season back into?
No, that ended up with us being promoted. So when I had signed for them, they were in the top league, but then they finished. I think they finished last or second last in that competition. So when I got there, we played in what was Division 1, or the top challenge, or you play Division 1, and when you win that, you go into the top challenge series for promotion the next year. So we end up winning that competition and getting promoted the following year.
Okay, so obviously MLR doesn't have any promotion aspect or in it at the time. So to go into a league in which, I guess, like, they're saying that obviously they want to get back into the top flight, back into the top league competition, how big of a celebration was it when Coca-Cola finally secured promotion for next season? Or was it a competition format like we see in, like, the English championship, where it's a like round robin elimination and then the final game, and whoever wins that gets promoted?
It was so long ago, I forgot, because I know they've changed their rules so much over the past few years, but I think the winner of the top challenge automatically goes through, and then second, third place, they would play a one-off game with, like, the the 14th place and 13th place of the top league to see, and if they win that, they're through, and if they don't, they've got to remain in Division 2 the following year. So I know it's different now, and they've got a completely different structure, but back then it was I think that the bottom team of top league automatically got relegated, that the winner of the top challenge automatically went up, and then there was still a second chance for a whole bunch of other teams to get through. But yeah, that was the expectation. I mean, I think that was the first time Coca-Cola's been demoted and down to Division 2. So the expectation was we go straight back up. And if that didn't happen, I'm pretty sure they're pretty ruthless over there. I'm pretty sure they would have cleaned house and got a whole new squad in the following year.
I've got a couple other questions about your playing career. Most notably, you played in the Arena Football League?
Yeah, that was that was an experience in itself. Hey.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, what was the Arena Football League like?
So,
and also, how did you end up in the Arena Football League?
Yeah, so to rewind a little bit, so when I played for Kubota, so my last season in Japan, had a few concussions, and I was told, look, you've got to look at thinking about something else to do with your life, but you should certainly take 12 months off. So as part of my rugby training, I'd worked with an American football kicking and punting coach to help my kicking technique, and I basically told him, look, I'm not going to play rugby anymore, but I'm interested in. I was still competitive. I didn't see that as the end of my rugby career, but I knew I had to do something for 12 months or a little bit more. So I went to him. I'm like, I'm very interested in going over and playing American football if there's any opportunity for me. And so we worked at it. We got a bit of film. He did my recruiting for me in terms of college football. And because I'd been to university before and already graduated, I only had like a semester of Division 2 eligibility, because Division 1 D2 eligibility are a little bit different. So I had a semester or a year of Division 2 eligibility. So I went over and got a scholarship to the University of Central Missouri, which was amazing. Like we were in a 20,000 person town, and 10,000 people came to the game. So it was really cool to be be in that environment. And then my after that season, I had no more eligibility, obviously. So I got picked up to go to training camp in one of the arena leagues. And so I tried out. I got to the last day of cuts. They knocked on my hotel door and said, sorry, we've gone in a different direction. So basically I had to pack my bags and work out what am I going to do with my life. I've come up over here to pursue football, and now I have no idea what I'm doing. But I ended up getting picked up by a different team, and played a couple of games for them, and it was, I mean, you're in a little stadium, a little indoor stadium, so it's loud. It's pretty cool for someone who kind of knew the rules but didn't really know the rules. I had to learn a lot as you go, but the expectations for a kicker over there, I mean, rugby, you know how you got to kick from the sideline and no one really expects you to make it, or like if you miss over there, like you've got coaches chewing your ass off basically. So it was an awesome experience, and my understanding of American football was like I knew who like Tom Brady, Drew Brees, all these guys were. Yeah. So I didn't know who like the next caliber of people were. And the arena leagues are basically a bunch of guys who are trying to get filmed to go that next level. So we get into training camp and people will be telling me, oh, that guy just got cut from this team. That guy just got cut from this team. He used to be with the Jets. He used to be with the Dolphins, yada, yada, yada. And then it was very, very ruthless, I found. Like we'd come in one day and there's X amount of people. And then we come in the next day and half those people are gone and replaced by another bunch of people. So yeah, it was definitely a different mindset. And the players there, I mean, that was, you'd have a chat with a few of them and very few people did it for fun. Like that was their way of getting their family. The Arena Football League's just a stepping stone to try to get to the NFL. So that was their way of getting their family out of poverty, whatever their situation was, and to make the NFL. And you talk to some guys and you're like, what are your interests, outside of football? And it was, no, this is I'm going to make the NFL. Like, and they basically poured everything into their sport. And I just thought that was so, it was such a cool experience to be around that sort of environment and be around people who was basically all or nothing. Like when you look at rugby, and rugby's like most rugby players have got a decent background, university background, that sort of thing, and they're playing rugby, especially in North America. You're playing rugby for fun, but you could be doing something else with your life and earning a lot more money. And it was the complete opposite for this group of guys. Like that was their way of supporting their families financially. And it was really cool to be around that mindset, and really cool to be in such a ruthless environment where if you didn't perform, you were gone the next day. And if you did perform, well, it guarantees you an extra day or an extra week in the environment.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, what were like? So I guess like you played it for a few couple of teams, a couple of years. How long were you in the league for? Like, as you said, it's a pretty ruthless environment. How?
Yeah, like I was in and out. So I went to training camp in 2016. Got cut at the end of training camp, and I didn't get invited back to another team till 2017. So I went to training camp with the team in 2017. Got cut from that team. Got picked up by another team and played a couple of games there. So in the middle of all of that, I had to be like, what do I do? And so that's how I joined the Chicago Griffins, because they offered me a place to stay and some rugby. So I played rugby to purely support my pursuit of American football. So I was playing rugby, but there might have been a couple of games I missed because I had to attend a tryout or this, that, or the other. Because, teams will call you and say, like, are you available this week? Can you come in and work out tomorrow, and that sort of thing? So that's how I ended up playing club rugby over in Chicago, to be honest.
And so obviously, I guess, that's your first introduction to rugby in North America, was playing for the Griffins while kind of maybe trying to balance a arena football?
Yeah, that was it. And absolutely loved it. Such a great group of guys. Any club you go to in North America. And I spent a few seasons there playing for Chicago, and really, really enjoyed it, and decent rugby. And this was before the MLR too. So you have some pretty good players running around club rugby. It's just, it's so big and there's so many clubs that the MLR had to happen to get the best players around the country in the one competition playing against each other.
Yeah, I agree. The MLR definitely did have to happen, and you were part of the Seattle Seawolves in the first year of MLR, where they won the title, the Shield. So what was that experience like, being not only playing for the MLR in its, like, at the beginning, but also, like, the team and the run that you guys had en route to the Shield for the first time?
Yeah, I signed the contract back in, so it was the 2018 season. So I signed the contract back in 2017, and I honestly felt like the competition wouldn't go ahead. It was all a bit unknown at that point in time. As a football player, I signed to play a couple of years before. I signed to play in a startup league that never got off the ground after 2 years. So as a football player, I more or less trained for 2 years for nothing, essentially. Yeah. So going into this, I was really wary that whether it would or wouldn't go ahead. And even as we got into preseason, everyone, all the teams, the league was still working it out in terms of, facilities, coaches, this, that, or the other. So we got into preseason, and there was always a bit of chat about, like, is this going ahead? Is this not going ahead? But then round one came and the fans showed up and the competition was great. And you knew that the comp was here to stay. And lifting the Shield with them was an amazing experience. And, Glendale were the favourites all year. They've beaten us twice during the regular season. And as a team, we just had a great group of guys. We were so calm and confident going into the game. And I think we showed up to captain's run. They had the final at a neutral venue back then.
Yeah.
So the final was in San Diego, and we showed up to Captain's Run the day before. We didn't have balls, or we didn't have balls for like 45 minutes. So we just were playing touch footy with someone's shoe. But a great experience, to be honest, and great group of lads, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them, and we still reminisce over that season. And playing in that comp and now coaching that comp, it's crazy to think how much the level has improved over the last 5 years, and is continuing to improve as well. Like back then, we trained like 8:30 at night. We did our gym in the day, and that was only just the full-time guys. And our gym sessions were in a public gym essentially, and we'd do a skill session on a basketball court. Then we'd have our team session. We'd have to wait for like under 10, 11, 12 soccer to get off the field so that us as the professional team can go train on it. And now the transition with all the teams basically is we run a daytime schedule. Everyone's full time, and it's a lot more professional now than what it was back then. But crazy experience, but it had to happen for rugby in North America, and really glad it has. And all the teams have basically moved to more or less fully professional, which has been great for rugby in the USA and in Canada.
Have you thought about incorporating the shoe touch rugby into Arrow's practices yet?
Well, depending on kit arrival, sometimes that gets delayed in customs. So maybe we might have to, ask me after the first week of January, see where we're at. But
see where we're at if the balls showed up.
Yeah. It eliminates kicking, that's for sure.
Yeah. I was gonna say, is it a punishment for the last player who's ready to get ready for training? It's like, don't put your shoes on just yet. Just give us one of them, and that'll be the ball for the first session.
Oh, definitely. We had a few Fijian players in the team anyway who love running around in bare feet. So,
great.
So I think it was Billy Tolotau who offered up his shoe, and we played with his shoe.
Right, that's fantastic to hear.
That actually genuinely sounds like a thing that he would do. Yeah. I've never met him, but just based on his persona publicly, that seems like very much like a thing he would do.
Persona, what you see is what you get. Probably the nicest person in the league. And I know he's not playing it anymore, but definitely the nicest person in the league.
That's just great to hear. Obviously, after the 2018 season, you retired on health grounds due to concussion. But when did the decision arise that you wanted to go into rugby coaching following your playing career? Was it, shortly after, or was it something you'd always had like in the back of your mind of what you can do once you had to call time?
Yeah, I knew from the age of 18, probably. As soon as I left high school, I went back and coached at my high school, and I got more out of the game as a coach and a player, and I enjoyed the game so much more as a coach and a player. I knew that's what I wanted to do. Look, I love the game, but as a player, I was always stressed out about my own performance and this, that, or the other. And I always felt as a coach being able to help players through that was something I was probably better at than being able to perform week in, week out in high performance environments, I guess you could say. I never specifically pegged coaching as something that I wanted to do full time since I left my career. I knew I always wanted to coach since finishing up rugby, but I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do it full time or not. And I felt at the time it was just an easier transition out of the game. Look, my whole life has been sports, competing, waking up, doing the same routine every single day. And that's what gave my life direction and meaning. And to lose that and go into something else completely different, I probably wasn't ready for. So I decided to go into coaching for that reason, as an easier transition out of the game, and absolutely loved it. I mean, I know it's a ruthless environment, and I know I've got a young family now, and a few bad games, and you're looking for another line of work. But at this point in time, I'm thoroughly enjoying what I'm doing, and so to answer your question, I knew I wanted to do it for a long time. I saw it as an easy transition out of the game, and didn't realize I love it as much as I would. So here we are.
How did you end up with the Toronto Arrows?
Good question. So Maya. She's from Chicago. She's my wife. She's from Chicago. During the Seattle season, we were going back and forth, and it was a little bit more difficult on our relationship. So I was talking to the Toronto Arrows about potentially playing there, just because Toronto was the closest city to Chicago, and it would have made our relationship a whole lot easier. And so I decided at the end of the season that I was going to retire. But I was talking to Mark at the time, who was amazing and took a shot on me. I said, look, I'm going to retire, but I'm interested in getting into coaching. If you've got any opportunities, and he brought me on and gave me an opportunity in Toronto, and that's basically how I got up here. And as I said, Maya's from Chicago. It was a whole lot easier on our relationship for her to go back and forth with her work, because it's only an hour flight away. And then with COVID, everything turned more or less remote, which made things even easier. So that's how I got up here. But I guess I'm going into my 5th year now, and the reason I've stayed so long are just the people up here. Like everyone, whether they're still involved or not, just loved rugby and cared so much for it. And it was just such a great environment to work in. And everyone makes you feel so welcome and part of the family, and always has time for you, and made sure that, as a new person to a city, you looked after. And management's been great. The coaching staff's been great. The players have been great. And I'd say, I'm happily going into my 5th year now, just because the club's surrounded itself with great people.
I feel like when I talk to a lot of the people that are associated with the Toronto Arrows, they kind of echo a lot of the same things that you just said, talking about like, how great the environment is. As like, you're the head coach of this team. So like, what does the Arrows culture mean to you, and how would you describe it? And like, what makes it, I guess, what it seems like such a great team to be a part of?
I think we were lucky enough to come through as the Ontario Blues. So we already had a tight group of boys coming from there. And when I first came on to coach here, I remember a few players saying, hey, you can room us with anyone and we would enjoy it, because we genuinely love everyone's company here. And I've never been, and that was genuine, and I've never been part of a team where everyone genuinely got along really well with whether it's, staff, players, that sort of thing. And so I think what we've got here is just a group of great people who love rugby, who love working hard, who want the best for the team. But I think we just have really, really good people involved within our team and within our squad, who want to push everyone and make everyone better. And I think that's the basis. I think that's the foundation of what we've built here. It's just a bunch of great people who work hard and who look after each other and care about each other. And I think that's reflected in our performance too. I mean, you see the guys put their body on the line, and they do that for each other. They do that for the fans. They do that for their family. And I think, when you look at our results from last year, or the way we played from last year, and I know some games were obviously better than others, but for the most part, it was just a bunch of guys who were playing for their team, playing for each other, playing for their city, and that's all you can really ask of them at the end of the day.
Yeah, obviously, you're saying in 2020, COVID hit and started working remotely. 2021, we're talking about obviously being close to your now wife in Chicago, and then in 2021, you have to say, by the way, I now have to move however many hours south to go to Atlanta Airport, because we'll be playing in Atlanta for that season. Obviously, from what we've heard from like players and staff members, seems like it was a very difficult and mentally draining season down in Atlanta. Can you share some of the difficulties and experiences that you took from the 2 COVID seasons, for lack of a better term?
I think you've spoken to everyone except me, because everyone talks bad of our time down in Atlanta, and I liked it. honestly, most people in the world work jobs they hate so they can earn a living to pay their bills, buy their food, and have a roof over their head. And I got to do what I love, and my accommodation was covered, and I was fed, and there were no complaints from my end. I think that season showed me the importance of mindset, and it was the same situation for one player compared to another player, and I know it was challenging, and I'll say that with a grain of salt, because I was lucky in terms of my partner was in America. She didn't have to cross the border, so I was able to see her a little bit more than other families, obviously. And I roomed with Aaron Carpenter too, who had to FaceTime his family at the end of every day, and that would have been incredibly hard for him, as well as a bunch of other staff members, a bunch of other players. But I think that season showed me the importance of mindset, and regardless of the situation or circumstance, the one thing you can control is your mindset and your outlook on it. And with the right mindset, I think teams, people, individuals can achieve a lot of great things in their life. And so taking some of the learnings from that year, it was hard being in a bubble. I know it was really hard for some of the players being in the bubble. I know it was really hard for some of the players to only see the same people for a certain amount of time. And so one of the challenges was obviously looking after the mental health of the players, maybe having to peel back on the rugby side of things to make sure that there's something else going on, but also having the balance to know when you've got to push from the rugby side of things too, because at the end of the day, we're down there as a rugby team, and we're down there to perform, and we're down there to win games. So it's always going to be a tricky balance when you're in one spot, be it a hotel or whatever it is, and there's not much of an outlet for a lot of people in the squad beyond just your rugby. Like, I know being down there, and I say I like it because I love what I do, and you basically had 24/7 access to the players and all of that. But you'd have a tough selection conversation with someone, and then you'd be in the elevator with them a couple hours later, and it's not ideal for players. Need to get away from rugby at various times, and it obviously wasn't ideal for them, unfortunately. But I think, all in all, that season made us a whole lot tougher and a whole lot more resilient, and everything happens for a reason, doesn't it? And you can look back on that season and think, well, it wasn't, we were 5-13, I think it was, but at the end of the day, to go 5-13, if it makes individuals, more resilient to things like that, if it makes them tougher, if it makes them think, that was a tough time in my life, and I know I can get through similar times in the future if they present itself. Well, then everything's a learning experience, isn't it? And at the end of the day, I think, looking back on it, we're a tougher team, we're a more resilient team as a result. And whilst it was challenging, you certainly got to look at the positives and the positives on everything that's happened in the past.
One of the big challenges that came from 2021, especially for the Arrows, was the MLR season was announced as running between March and August, because, in all fairness, no one knew if there was going to be an international season in 2021. Then it's announced that Canada and the USA are playing games in Europe, and it fall like slap bang within like the second half of the season, and players need to be taken away. And obviously, because there's so many Canadian players on the Arrows, that leaves like half your squad is suddenly unavailable for 3 or 4 weeks. So when it came to bringing in new names and the return of some familiar faces such as Sam Malcolm, how was it for them to come into this now bubble environment and play in Atlanta?
I think it was really good for the squad, to be honest, because you just got new faces. I mean, you had a group of guys who had to deal with the same group of people for however many months, and then all of a sudden you got new faces, new people to talk to, and people coming in with a fresh perspective on things, and people coming in knowing that they're only going to be there 3-4 weeks or whatever it was, so they know they can just give 100% of their time for those handful of weeks. I think it was really good for us because it gave us a little bit of, as the season was sort of dwindling down and we were out of playoff contention and we're losing a handful of our best players. Well, then we got the opportunity to have new faces in and a different perspective on things and have a look at a few players for the future too. So I think it kind of helped us through those last 2-3 weeks of the season, if I'm being honest, and it gave it kind of rejuvenated the squad a little bit too. So yeah.
So following that season and going into the 2022 season, you were named head coach. Became the youngest head coach in MLR's history so far. 2022 season was obviously great to be back. Oh, great for us as fans that live in Toronto to have you guys back home. But as you know, he had some great wins, a couple tough losses, had to deal with a very wild injury situation with scrum half. How do you look back on your first season as head coach? And what was that experience like, taking the reins of a professional rugby team for the first time?
Yeah, it was a tough one, to be honest. I think we underachieved so much as a team. When you look at our roster and you look at the quality of players on our roster, and unfortunately, a fair few of them were out injured for much of the season. But I certainly thought we had the capacity to go further. Knowing it was my first year as head coach, you always feel like you're ready, and then you come into it, and there's just so much you didn't know, and it was a great learning experience for me, and I think certainly equipped me better to handle going into next season. I didn't want to try to reinvent the wheel or too much coming in or change too many things. I think that season, gave us a good gauge of where we were and what we needed to do to be successful in future years. And I think with the support of our management and just our group as a whole, I think we've been able to learn from the past and be in a position to set this team up really well to be successful in the future.
So with the 2023 season, pre-season camp is only a few weeks away. And the Arrows have already announced some new names that are coming into the squad. A lot of fellow Australians coming in, some of them with Canadian eligibility as well. Some departures, but when it comes to making those decisions of player selection, I think the first new signing that was announced, the Arrows even had a photo with you and the new player there. When you're looking for these players, obviously Canadian eligibility is a big thing because that helps with visas and things like that. But is there any particular quality that you're looking for in these players? And is it like a missing puzzle piece that you have in your mind of like, this player can fit in, and then we have the ideal team for the new season?
It's usually a missing puzzle piece, a little bit. Like we want a well-rounded squad and to be strong in various areas and have different types of players in different types of positions to allow us to maybe change up the game plan depending on who we're coming in and playing against. But anyone we bring in, I think you're referring to Nick Ben down from Manly in Australia when we caught up. Like we'd meet everyone, whether it's on Zoom or in person, just to make sure that they're of the mindset that we want out of a player. They're hungry, they're coming in ready to go, ready to learn. And they're going to fit our squad. I mean, I know we spoke about our culture before, and one of our big prerogatives is to make sure we don't bring in anyone who's going to be detrimental to our culture or our team. And so, look, we'll look at various things. We'll obviously, number one is their playing ability and whether they can suit the style of game that we want to play or provide us with a point of difference within our squad. And if they can, then we'll obviously dig in on their personality and what their future aspirations are. I know we always ask players who come in, what is it you want to achieve with your rugby career? And if it's to come over here and just relax, then it's probably not the place for you. But if they want to use the MLR as a stepping stone to to go elsewhere in their career, whether it's a big contract somewhere else. I think this is a place for them because like anyone that we've brought in the past or we're bringing in the future, we want a squad who are coming in, who are willing to work hard, who are hungry to get better as rugby players, and I think that's the most optimal way you can build a squad.
I am curious, kind of, I guess, about one element of, I guess, Arrow's recruiting, because I know it was a thing that even like Kingsley Jones touched on a few months back with regards to the national team, but and you obviously we talked about the Shoot Shield earlier this year, and you brought in, as you said, Nick Ben, Will Grant, Connor Grindall, a handful of guys, and also Fabian Goodall, but Grindall, Grant, Ben, like those are guys that have Canadian eligibility as well, which, as Stu, I think, alluded to, kind of helps with MLR because, one, they're considered domestic players, so you don't burn those international slots as well. But like, how do you guys go about finding out if guys have that Canadian eligibility? Like, how difficult of a process is that? Because, versus maybe like, do you like showing up to a Shoot Shield game, seeing the roster, seeing that the guy's born in Australia? Like, how do the conversations happen so that you maybe get alerted to the fact that there's some Canadian eligible players playing in leagues around the world?
Yeah, it's always a tough one because there's a lot who either don't know that they're eligible or have been undiscovered. I think in the cases of those three, they were put forward to us. I think one by an agent and two by whether it was family or friends or connections or something like that. Connor and Nick were actually put forward to us a few years ago. So we've been watching them and tracking them for probably the past 3 seasons. And they've always been on our radar. And when we felt like they were at that level and ready to come up here, then we knew we were going to give them a shot. And then Will was put in touch with us this year. And just with his background, we knew he was a guy that we wanted to take a chance on and bring up here. So it's finding those players is hard, and we are reliant on players reaching out to us, whether it's directly or through their agents. But it's a very difficult process to be able to find Canadian eligible players elsewhere in the world. But I know it's something that we're working on with the director of player development, as well as Rugby Canada's working on as well, just to make sure we have. We keep track of all the potential players around the world who are available to us in case we need them or in case there's an opportunity to come up here and play.
Just to go back to the 2022 season, obviously we mentioned before a string of bad luck with getting, I think it was like 8 scrum halves signed over the season to cover the position, because it seemed as soon as one player was fit, they'd come on and then something would happen. I think it was even one game you had to have Sam Malcolm double as a scrum half to go it. So 2 things. One, how do you then search for that emergency cover for those kind of positions? And have you brought in an exorcist just to make sure that any curse that's placed on the team last season has now been firmly removed and we're all going to be okay for 2023?
There is talk of retiring the number 9 jersey because it may be cursed. Just have a number 21 and maybe number 24 out there, but we'll see. It was a crazy one, wasn't it? We were lucky enough to have 3 players come out of retirement in Jamie McKenzie, Riley Donato, and Gordy McGrory to help us through that time. But in terms of, so obviously with the Pacific Pride, there are a group of players on our depth chart who aren't with our senior squad. We've got the Pacific Pride out there. We've got our academy as well. And we do have a handful of quality players running around in club rugby too, who we know if we do suffer certain injuries in certain positions, we know who the next guy up or the guy after that or the guy after that is going to be. So I think, we're now that club rugby is back in Toronto. I know we had those COVID years. Now that everything's sort of up and running again. Now there are academies more or less professionalized as well. I think if we are to get in sort of some injury trouble next year, we're in a much better place to be able to bring guys up into the fold and into the senior squad.
One of the other things I really wanted to ask you too, with you had a couple players, and James O'Neill, Mitch Richardson, have gone over to play for Melrose during this past season. It's like, how has that been going for you? And like, do you find like that's benefiting the Toronto Arrows by like building these partnerships and having guys like O'Neill and Richardson playing overseas during the MLR off season?
Similarly, Adrian Wadden is playing in Hong Kong at the moment. And this partnership of Arrows players going overseas. On top of what Derek just said, can fans expect players from either Melrose or Hong Kong to be coming over on like a part-time basis in the 2023 season?
Yeah, so I'll tackle your question there, Stu. We probably wouldn't at this stage expect any Melrose players or Hong Kong players coming up to us, just because we're so limited in terms of our squad size and salary cap and all of that. So it's hard for us to provide some of those opportunities to those players, although it is something that we certainly do look at when whether it's the Hong Kong Rugby Union or Melrose put forward players for us to consider. But for us, it's such a short season in terms of 6 months. When you look at other competitions around the world, they're going on 10 months or so, or they say Super Rugby. You've got your Super Rugby, but then you're playing in the NPC in the off season. Our challenge is trying to get guys as much game time as possible, so that they're able to improve over the course of a year, rather than just 6 months with us and then doing nothing for the majority of the off season. I think it's a wider problem in the country too. When you look at the Ontario universities, for example, they only play a handful of games in the year, and then the season's done, and so to get these guys developed and up to the level that we'd like them to be and to really reach their potential, they've just got to be playing. You can do as much training as you want in the world, but the more you play games, the better you're going to be. And so our ability to provide James and Mitch opportunities in Scotland and Adrian opportunities in Hong Kong, I know they're going to come back to us much better players. And our challenge is to be able to do that with hopefully more players the following season. And I think we're going to see a knock-on effect in future years in terms of the development of our guys, particularly the guys that don't make the national team. I know the national team had a pretty heavy off season for us, but heavy season just in terms of their training load and all of that. But we want to make sure that the guys not involved in that the guys not involved in that are getting as much rugby and rugby development in as possible, whilst also giving them the opportunity to experience something else, a different environment, different culture, and be able to travel the world.
Yeah, and I guess to maybe kind of wrap up a little bit of our off-season chat here, what are the expectations for this team going into the 2023 season?
Good question. We want we obviously set our expectations pretty high. I think with the squad that we've built and everything that's been done off the field to get this team geared up and ready to compete next year, we've set our expectations very high going into the season. But I want this to be a team that Canadians are proud to support, that young players all around the country aspire to play for in the future. I know, just talking with our owner, Bill Webb, he has lots of parents, kids coming up saying, how do I become a Toronto Arrow? And so, yeah, I know, particularly in my time being up here, I know the results for the national team haven't really gone the way we had hoped. And I always hate to see or read a lot of flack that gets thrown their way. And I just want to make sure that, we do the best we can to make this a team that Canadians are proud to get behind and support, and that it's a team that, whether it's young kids, university kids, you want to aspire to be part of this team and play for the Arrows.
Besides lifting the shield as a coach, because you've already done it as a player, What are your hopes for your tenure with the Toronto Arrows?
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit before. I just want this to be a team that Canadians are proud to support, and that young players aspire to in the future. And with that, obviously, comes results, and people get behind teams that are winning. And so, we know a big focus for us going into next year is to get the results on the board and win games of rugby and really go as far as we can go. And I think if we're able to do that, um, the fans will show up. They'll get behind this team, and it would really feel like Canada's team in the MLR.
That's good. And we know that in 2031, the men's rugby World Cup will be coming to the United States. So, from a position of looking as the league as a whole, as a head coach, what are your hopes that you want to see from Major League Rugby between now and 2031?
It's a good question. I think, look, the level of competition has gone up dramatically year on year. I think the amount of foreign spots in the league has to go down. You look at Japan, other countries, and they're varied between 2 and 4 foreigners on the field at any one time, and you see the results that's had with their own national teams. We've got 10 in our league, and look, some teams are going into the league next year with 12 foreign spots, and my question would be, how are we developing the spine of international teams that way when you've got foreign, the type of players you got to recruit from a foreign perspective, but how do the domestic players get developed in that sort of way? And it's such a short season too that the development window is very, very hard, because you have such a short preseason, you're already into the season, and then everything, you got to win games, you got to sell tickets, everything becomes about winning from that. So I think the amount of foreign spots has to go down, and we got to promote more domestic players and more homegrown players, and I think there's got to be a competition that runs parallel to Major League Rugby, such as our academies. So I think the level of academies has to improve dramatically, and there's got to be like similar to, let's say, Europe when they run their A leagues and that sort of thing. Like right now, the challenge with Major League Rugby and with our team in particular is we pick the 23 guys to play on the weekend, but there's no game, and that's still with weather and the season of club rugby and all of that. There's no game for a player not on the 23 to go work on the things that they need to work on and show that they're capable of pushing for selection, unfortunately. And I think in the future, it's certainly not a next year thing, but in the future down the line, being able to have an academy season run parallel where you've got that next year tier of player, and you can really look to blood and develop younger players, and raise the level of that, or raise the level of that tier below, and bring the development pathway up. I think we'll see a dramatic rise in the competitiveness of our domestic national teams.
So it's saying that it's like with the foreign players point there, it's like is that part of like the philosophy of how the Toronto Arrows are building the team? Because you guys have traded away 2 of your foreign player slots and have the least amount of foreign player slots in the league right now. And obviously, I mean, like it seems like it's kind of been like I guess a bit of a philosophical way of building the squad, because the Arrows have, in their whole history, have been very much predominantly Canadian and one of the most, I guess, domestic heavy teams in the league.
We have, and we're lucky enough. We're lucky enough to have such quality domestic players as well, and a fair bit of depth in certain positions from a domestic point of view. We do have the least amount of foreign spots, obviously, because I think we've got probably the strongest amount of depth, particularly from a domestic point of view. But one area that we've had to obviously recruit, and in particular recruit foreigners in, is in that forward pack, and we've obviously need to recruit a few bigger bodies in the squad to be able to be a bit more competitive up front, I guess you could say. But to answer your question there, Derek, yeah, definitely. I think we can rely on a little bit less foreigners than some other teams, just because of the strength of our domestic players within the squad and within Canada.
And with your thought on the academies, can we expect more academy games this year, or is that still maybe a couple of years out for like a full blown, like maybe regular schedule for those teams?
No, I think we can. I think last year we obviously were lucky enough to have Queen's University come in, Melrose come in, that sort of thing. But I think from an MLR perspective, certainly in conference, all teams are pretty focused on getting their academies up and running and getting them as competitive as possible. So the hope is to have kind of an in-conference academy season and more games within the academy. I know they had them lined up last year, but there were various logistical issues from time to time. But now with I think more time out of COVID and more planning time, we're going to see a few more games for the academy for sure.
Now, more rugby is always something I'm down for, so I'll be looking forward to that. Maybe I know that the Arrows, and I think it was their game against New York, was supposed to be a double header with the New York Academy team, which unfortunately fell through. Or I know that one of the games fell through, which was disappointing. But hopefully, a few double headers at York Lions Stadium. I can't argue with that. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Pete, thank you so much for joining us for this interview on the podcast. If any of our listeners and watchers want to listen to any more of our podcasts, you can do so on Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Or if you like watching our podcast, you can do so on our YouTube channel at the Rouge Rugby. In fact, you can find us across all our social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the Rouge Rugby. Now, Pete, you said you're not really big on social media, but if any listener or watcher wants to go and see a Toronto Arrows game next season, where can they buy tickets from?
Yeah, to buy tickets, just head over to our website, torontoarrows.com. I think we've got a Christmas special on at the moment. So, head over to torontoarrows.com and you'll be able to get tickets to all our games for next season at York Lions Stadium.
Yeah, I can't think of any better Christmas gift than getting Arrows tickets for next season. Derek, where can the fine people find you online?
At Brissett the Jet across all social media platforms.
And you can find me across all social media platforms at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Australia. We definitely do appreciate it. Derek, thanks again for joining me for this episode of the podcast. And thanks to all our listeners and watchers for joining us this year. This is our final episode of 2022. We hope you've enjoyed following us throughout the MLR season and following Canadian rugby throughout this year. We're looking to give you more interviews and more Canadian rugby action coming up in 2023. So from all of us here at Rouge Rugby, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you can join us again next time.